Imagine having one extra day every week, more time to cook healthy meals, work on that novel, or just binge some good reality TV. Now it's all possible with ClickUp, the productivity platform that'll save you one day a week on work guaranteed. It's packed with features and customization options that no other productivity tool has, so you can work the way you work best. Use code BizTech to get 15% off ClickUp's massive unlimited plan for a year, meaning you can start reclaiming your time for under $5 a month. Sign up today at clickup.com and use code BizTech. Hurry, this offer ends soon.
Hey Coconut, so yes, recently we ran a poll on our Telegram group to ask you what do you want to learn, what do you want us to focus on, and not surprisingly, everybody wants to focus on increasing their income. That's why you tune into a financial podcast every week. So together with Adrian, a great friend of the show, I'm going to run a 3-part series with him to focus on how do we go about getting that income raise. I essentially go in and negotiate for that raise so that you make more money, and that is the top line of your whole financial structure. So in these 3 parts we're going to do before going to ask for the raise, during asking the raise, and after asking the raise. What if you don't get the raise? What's going to happen? And in today's episode, we're going to focus on the before portion, right? So today we're going to talk about, essentially what should you prepare before you go in and knock on your boss's door and say, hey boss, I want a pay raise. So good morning, everyone. I welcome you to another day with the Financial Coconut. In our podcast, we're debunking financial myths, discovering best financial practices, and discussing financial strategies that fits our unique life. You get it, ultimately empowering us to create a life we love while managing our finances well. My name is Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and yes, today we shall begin our pursuit of raising our income. So yes, Adrian, happy to have you back on the show.
Thanks,
Yes, by now. So, wow, your 故事has everything. You've been on the show for quite a few times. But for all the listeners that are tuning in and they don't yet know you, do you want to elaborate on who you are, what you do, and blah, blah, blah?
Sure, happy to. So I'm Adrian. I was a former HR entrepreneur, started my business in HR in 2004 from recruitment, went into career coaching, outplacement, HR consultancy, eventually gone into HR technology. So 2 jobs ago, I was heavily in that space with an enterprise HR company. Before going into the education space, being the neutral party in educating the market, what needs to be done when it comes to the future of work.
Is that a true neutral party?
You try to be you try to be as neutral as you can. Hashtag sponsored lah. So you try your best to do so, and but having said that, I have more or less pivoted away from that. Right now, I'm playing more of a marketing strategist role, which is more of my one-man show lah. But targeted specifically for companies that would be looking to sell to HR departments, helping them to market themselves better, especially for smaller companies that may not have the capabilities to hire their own marketing department. So in terms of HR careers-wise, been there, done that, have seen so many times. I'm still frequently giving talks to universities, schools, sometimes even to PMEs on how to navigate the career landscape. I'm very fascinated when it comes to job search, especially because they are really, if you really think about it, for HR departments, since 20 years back compared to now, there's so many different kind of technology. There's ATS, there's robot recruiter, etc., etc. But when you look at job seeker, still the same thing. Your A4 size paper Word document is whether you can type faster or not. That's about it. So, but by having said that, I realized it is really just a matter of digging deeper. There's actually a lot more stuff out there. And these are things that I'm very passionate to share with the audience.
Nice. And you have a new show coming up, right? So you currently already run your own show, which our audience probably already know, called The Adrian Tan Show. And you have a new show, right? What is this new show? Let's plug it here first.
Oh, the new show is actually a collaboration with Channel News Asia. It's called Work It. We haven't officially launched it as the time of this recording, but it is very much centered around work matters. So my podcast, my personal podcast, is really more towards the future of work, technology aspect of things. Although I did touch on a few guests who are in very interesting career pivots, but ultimately not so much work related. So this CNA one give me a premise to collaborate with one of the producer and to really dig a bit deeper on work matters. So if I were to distill it down, basically my podcast is work of the future, whereas the CNA one is work that is happening today.
Okay, work it. Nice. And if the show blows up, then we'll try to wah jiao you lah. We'll try to we'll try to dig Adrian with the show in, right? So, but yeah, check out his podcast and thank you for taking time in with me. So today we're gonna try a new format, right? It's a little bit of an algorithm killer because we're gonna cut it into 3 parts. So we're gonna focus on essentially tips on how to ask for more money, right? Because I think we recently run a poll on a Telegram group and a lot of people are saying, my focus is to try to increase my income. And for the many listening in, many of us do work for companies and pretty much that's the main source of income, right? So maybe Adrian, before we begin, right, why do you think we should ask for more money? I think everybody kind of knows like internally, it's like, yeah, I want to, have a little bit more cafe. I want to buy my house a bit closer. I want to travel a little bit more, right? So those are very real desires, right? But in your view, why should I ask for more money?
I think there's a number of instances why you should consider asking for more money. And there's, if I were to distill it down, it's really 5 key areas that you should look at. One, of course, you've been working there for a long time. And when I say long time, it is at least a year lah. So that will provide
a year considered long already. Yeah.
Oh, in today's context, a year considered long. I mean, it's long. It's long enough.
No more long-term service award, bro. No more 10, 15, 20.
It's definitely not long enough for long service award, but it is sufficient enough for you to really knock on your boss door and say, hey boss, can I talk to you for a second? And really deep dive into this topic because you have at least a year of period to trial and error, experiment, and to see what works, what doesn't, and importantly, to collate sufficient good performance to showcase. And of course, the other thing is you may have taken on new jobs and obligation. So those are things that you may want to put into consideration as well. And of course, your performance has been better than expected lah. When you are performing well beyond benchmark. And this is something that I believe everyone should really stand up and say, hey, then I think I deserve to get more salary as well. And the other thing, of course, if we look around us today, everything has been inflated. From your housing, I stay in Pasir Ris. Someone just bought a $1 million EA here in Pasir Ris.
Pasir Ris got $1 million.
Pasir Ris also got $1 million. I'm officially in a $1 million estate as well.
Why would anybody want to stay there?
I have no idea. And it's very far away from MRT. I have no idea. Maybe feng shui lah, I don't know. So HDB to your food, to your utilities, everything has gone up. But salary has so far stayed very stagnant. And also, I think the last thing is right now, especially in Singapore, we are in an employee market. For many of the functions as well as industries out there, companies are struggling to hire. Whether they are in manufacturing, in tech startup, in banking, fintech, you name it lah. Every companies out there is struggling. Which is why I think all this combination of factors, even if they are isolated, it is really a good premise for employee or to make use of the situation. Because if you don't use this kind of situation to ask for salary increase, what are you waiting for? Recession? That doesn't make sense. Right? So I think the timing of it also matters a lot. And right now, with all this taken into consideration, I think it's really a very good juncture, provided you have some form of longevity in the company lah. And as we did discuss earlier on, at least a year lah.
Nice. So before we begin on this first part of our discussion, I want to dig your brain a little bit deeper on the whole idea of unionization. Because currently I'm in London, right? So being in London, there was a recent union strike. Pretty much. And exactly like what you say, right? It's because of inflation and then the people want to get more money and they want to collectively negotiate, right? But in Singapore, not very common. I don't hear this thing. I don't know what our unions are doing. So just want to get clarity from you. Do people collectively negotiate or is it always a man for themselves, right? Which is pretty much the part that we're going to talk about lah.
I think it really much depends on the function of the role. I deal mainly with white collar or what Singapore would deem as PME lah, professional managerial executive. When you look at those category of people, right, firstly, they are not even covered by Employment Act. I mean, to some extent, but they have their own employment agreement. Everything is between the company and the individual, of course, within the banding and the perimeter of what the company and the HR department set forth. Union kind of stuff actually make more sense when it is more for a larger group of audience and predominantly in a very blue-collar space. Like the union for, let's say, bus captains, union for factory workers of this company because they have 100 over factory workers, etc. But I think we also notice since the beginning of Singapore, not as if we're very old, but at least based on what we've read. Singapore started as a basic manufacturing hub. And then we progressed, one of the, four or five tiger lion, I don't know what's the term anymore. But basically, we started in the manufacturing space. Lion. And then, but we are being priced out. So right now, people don't come to Singapore to manufacture. They go to Taiwan, Vietnam, etc., etc. And studies have also shown that the percentage of PME has gone up significantly. In fact, if I don't remember wrongly, I think by 2030, if I don't remember wrongly, NTUC is looking at up to 60+% of our total workforce being PME. So you can imagine, when NTUC first started, or the union here first started, almost close to 100% of the workforce are their target audience. But it has shrunk to 30%. And moving forward, it will continue to shrink because we just don't have that market. So I do think to some extent, they can still play a better part, especially for the people who are undertaking those roles, because if we look at things from an education and a demographic perspective, you can somewhat define them as a vulnerable group for a variety of reasons. And because of that, they do benefit from certain form of representation, which could put them in a better light, and to do so collectively.
Nice, yeah. And maybe the PMEs should unionize also. Right, but that's a different discussion for another day. And focusing on this series that we're going to do, I think today's episode we're going to focus on before asking for money, right? So you have worked for a year, you have some experience and all that jazz. What is the point number one before we prep for asking for money?
I think point number one is really to find out your worth. Find out how much can you expect to get. And there are a lot of different ways for you to gather those information. A quick and dirty way, of course, is to go to MOM website. They actually provide salary information, I think on a bi-yearly basis. Having said that, do take note. Information usually from MOM are pretty dated. They usually release 6 months after they have collated. You probably would have also seen recruitment companies, Kelly Services, Adecco, so on and so forth, putting out salary guides. And some of them are very specific to a particular industry. And those will be interesting reference to look at as well. Having said that, I came from the recruitment industry, and recruitment companies, make money from a percentage of the placement. Meaning to say, the higher your salary, the better it is for me. So there might be some cynical reason why they may want to, inflate the salary guide. So you may want to take note and provide the relevant discount factor. Of course, you can go to website like Glassdoor. Some people will put it openly up there. There's also salary site like PayScale, etc. In Singapore specifically, there's a company called Salary Board. BOARD. And the premise is really more as a compensation tool for companies, but they also have an individual front end where you can go in, put in, say, your job title, whether you're SME, MNC, whether your job has management oversight, so on and so forth, and come up with the right perimeter and show you, okay, this is how much other people in the same function are getting. So this is where you should be. So all this information, I think collectively will be very useful for you to get a mean. So don't just depend on a single source of truth, because usually it is not true. So you want to gather as many information as possible and try to aggregate them. So that is one thing. And the other thing, of course, you can just talk to people. I'm very certain within your function, you don't work in isolation. Even if you do, you probably know of peers who are working in your competition. So the guy working at SIA most likely know the lady who works at MAS or whatever. So within networking sessions, or maybe within some form of events, etc., there's always occasion where you all can meet up and to discuss more. Of course, not meet up and immediately, hey, how much you get? This is not those awkward Chinese New Year setting. But you want to, of course, have a better understanding of at least the kind of scope that they are providing. And that may help you to decipher better. Because one thing that I also do realize, which my friend from Salary Board told me, because he's a founder, he's a CEO. He told me something which I remember very fondly, which is the CEO of DBS Bank differs from CEO of Salary Board, which back then was, I don't know how many headcount. And rightfully so. So when you look at a lot of salary guide out there, they will tell you, oh, CEO, this amount. Not accurate. CEO of a one-man shop versus CEO of Citibank, you're drawing very different salary. You have different bonus structure. So with understanding of at least your peers, their scope, the coverage, regional, local, the number of people that they manage, etc. Whether you manage 5 people, they manage 20 people, all this will have a significant impact on the salary. Even if you guys are earning the same amount, the scope alone that the other person is doing will overwhelm you already. So those are small little things that one has to take into consideration.
But I think that's a little bit of an extreme example, right? CEO of a small startup and CEO of a huge MNC. But what about managers, right? I think because most of our listeners, they will be like, maybe executive trying to enter the managerial realm, right? So they kind of manage the same amount of people, let's say 5, 10 people, but some can be a 5, 10 small department in a big company. Some can be a 5, 10, maybe half the company 就是他 manage already, right? So is there also a lot of salary divergence in such a situation where we manage the same amount of people, but one is in a relatively smaller company, one is in a bigger company?
For sure. And this is happening, I think, much more prevalent because of all these crypto companies. I'm sure you've heard of crypto companies that only pay by tokens. They don't pay by salary. So how do you benchmark against that? Very hard to benchmark. My benchmark today versus my benchmark tomorrow different because your token price keeps fluctuating. How do I benchmark? So that's one thing.
The best thing is they issue their own token. They don't even need to pay you in real money.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they own the currency. But yes.
So
continue.
So the other thing to take note of, and I had shared this example before, you also have to take into consideration the kind of profit margin that the company is selling. If you want to go and bang table and ask for a huge raise in a company like Apple, that makes what kind of ridiculous margin on an iPhone? I think you can safely say you're more or less quite safe. But if your company manufacture paper clip or sell toothpick, what is the kind of margin? How much percentage of salary increment can you ask? I think those are things that you have to take into consideration. But of course, by and large, across the board, if you were to factor in things like, you are in manufacturing, I'm in F&B, I manage 5 headcount, I manage 5 headcount. Of course, there will be certain things that will be quite common, but the industry disparity will then come into play. Manufacturing maybe is still very 8 to 5, for instance. F&B, 12-hour shift. Weekend also need to work. There has to be some hardship labor factored into the salary as well. So when we compare, we always have to compare like for like. If you compare across industry, there's a lot of things you have to account for, which is why when you look at salary guide or cost of living index across country, they always factor in a lot of things to make sure that they can arrive at a common denominator. Otherwise, when you go haywire, you compare the car of a BMW X5 in Singapore versus the one in London. I was told, I remember many years ago when I was still driving that. By the way, X5, I think in Singapore, I don't know, 300 plus thousand. My ex-colleague back then, do you want me to tell you how much an X5 costs in London? Please don't tell me. It costs £35,000.
Yeah, and it doesn't help our COE is in 6-figure now, right? It's still in the hundreds of thousands, or whatever the number is. Yeah. So, and all these are essentially scattered information, right? So we try to find out the median in the market. We try to find out what our friends in the same sector, are being paid, or if even similar company size, they're being paid. Then how do we put it together to evaluate our own worth?
So I think, of course, you have to be really confident that you are delivering good work. And that most likely can come in the form of getting the kind of positive feedback on your regular one-to-one session, on your performance review session. So once you're confident with that, and also to get a better footing on what other companies are paying the same headcount, that is where I believe you can have the courage to really explore further. Not just to go straight in, but really to explore further. And what do you mean by explore further? Because I have not actually completed some other aspect of who you can, the kind of data points you can collect. One key data point that you can collect, which is very useful and very current, although it can be quite survivor bias, is to talk to headhunter. Because headhunter, they deal with companies day in, day out. In fact, on an hourly basis, they'll be talking to some hiring manager from different companies. Especially if you talk to a headhunter in your niche. Let's say this headhunter only does fintech placement or only places CFO. You know straight away whatever numbers he or she give, right, would be a good number. And importantly, these people, again, has vested interest. So if you happen to talk to them, it will give you a sense of what is the actual acceptable value that a company can undertake. And that will give you more confidence to go into your boss office and ask for that specific number. So again, it is just one data point. Need to gather all these data points to make sure that, okay, when I gather the average of all these data points, I look at where I am. Actually, there's a disparity. I'm quite far away. I think I am in that position to ask for more. Over and above that, I've been performing well. I've been consistent. I never talking. I never MC on a long weekend. Those kind of stuff. So all this put into play, I think that would really give you the opportunity and the right timing to ask for the salary increment.
Nice. And I think you, in the beginning of our episode today, you did mention a little bit on the changing job scope, right? Because it is true, right? Once you sit in a company for a period of time, the scope is ever changing, right? Because the company keeps moving, a new project, new direction. So at the end of a year or two, right, your job may be very different from how you first started. So ask for more money. Okay, which brings us to point number 2, before asking for more money, and that is?
So the point number 2 is really a precursor before asking, which is really to keep track of how you've been doing. And I think there's something that we all struggle to do.
And before we continue, we must have a word from our sponsor. Okay, if no sponsor, no show. Okay, so keeping track of our performance. Help us elaborate a little bit. How do we keep track? How do we even know that we are performing? Because you keep talking about it, right? Like, oh yeah, we are performing. You must be performing so that you can negotiate. But how do I know I'm performing?
So this is something that you can gather feedback from your manager. And of course, there are certain companies, certain settings, certain managers, I would say, that don't really even bother. I know people who have gone through jobs, decades in their jobs, and every time just meet my manager to sign form only. That's their performance review, the big paper performance review that actually doesn't materialize to anything. I remember speaking with a HR director of a large school in Singapore, and he was telling me our performance appraisal is actually done after our bonus period. Then I'm like, then what's the point? Oh no, paperwork, it's just paperwork. So that may not be helpful in certain settings, which is why you have to keep track of it yourself. Recently, I read a very interesting Medium article about this guy, and he mentioned something along this line, and he called it a brag doc, BRAGDOC. So basically, it's a document you want to keep on things that you can brag about yourself. And those are things that includes your previous review of performance, any awards that you've done, you've collected. Are there any successful projects? Do you receive any email, messages, WhatsApp from customer, co-worker? Are there data that shows that your action helped the company save money, make money, those kind of stuff? And importantly is whether you may be able to give the company some return on investment based on whatever ideas that you've put out there. And these are things that I believe you will want to arrive at maybe a 1-2 page kind of length, and that will give you sufficient supporting document and evidence to go into the meeting room or go into your boss office to really discuss the salary matter. And again, going back to collecting and tracking all this, I realize it is very difficult for most of us, especially Asian context. We are all like, okay lah, it's like that one lah, it's part of my job lah.
Yeah, people will see it if they know I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness.
We tend to we have this tendency to play down our achievement. Whereas if you look at Ang Mo, opposite one. Oh, you don't want to take credit? I claim the credit. So that makes it very hard. So I one of the things that I am also trying to advocate for people to consider is schedule it into your calendar. It could be a daily thing, it could be a weekly thing, end of the week, end of the day. Put in that calendar indication to prompt you. What is your past week achievement? What is your achievement today? What is a good thing that happened to you today? Just keep collecting it down. You don't have to write nice essay, you don't have to polish the words. The idea is to collect enough information. So just before you're ready to go and have the salary discussion, then you can start to prune and cherry pick. Okay, I've written 100 items so far. Force rank, which is the top 10. This top 10, let me deep dive. The rest, I put one side first. So I think it has to be a regular exercise and really take stock. It's something like, tracking our steps. Of course, it's made easy with our smartwatch. So we know, today 8,000 steps, yesterday 7,000 steps. But when it comes to work, you don't have that mechanism. So you have to do it manually.
Nice. And just now you talk a little bit about saving money and making money for the company. I thought it was interesting because maybe some of our listeners, in fact, I would say maybe many of our listeners may not have direct impact in like making more money or saving more money for the company, right? They may be in the operational role, they may be part of the process, they are not like front, salespeople are quite easy to evaluate, right? Got sell a lot means good lah, right? Or people in cost cutting, quite clear, right? But what about everyone else in between? Is that the core idea of how companies measure? Because I can understand why companies measure these things, right? The sole profit of a sole goal of a company is to profit, right? That's the main mechanics behind it. But how important is it? And is everyone else subjected to the same kind of premise?
I think for most private, profit-oriented companies, it will make sense unless you are trying to work in the civil service.
Like almost all, right?
I mean,
unless you hire by public lah or something. Yes, civil service.
Correct. Yeah, charity maybe so, maybe partially. But that's a very good question, and I've been asked by some candidate about that as well. So the way I try to frame it to them is, okay, think of your role and imagine if you just disappear for 5 days. What's the worst that can happen? And how expensive would those things actually work out to be? So for instance, let's say you do, I don't know QC in a factory. 5 days you just pongtang, you MIA. What's going to happen?
Don't.
Hypothetically, just example only.
We hypothetize. Yes.
So imagine 5 days MIA. What's going to happen? Or error rate may go up, lor. And error rate go up. What does it mean? We have to manufacture more to compensate for the wrong things that we manufacture, lah. Is that going to add cost to the company? Yeah, it's going to add cost to the company. And then you can work out, lor, exactly the kind of cost that you are actually saving, the kind of damage that you are actually preventing. Because if you think about it, it actually occurs to even insurance. What insurance? How do you put a price to it? It's the kind of damage that you are literally preventing. Data protection officer. How do you help the company save money? Because of me, you won't have data breach. You don't have data breach, you don't have to pay $1 million fine to, I don't know, IMDA or whoever. So there are still ways for you to monetize or to quantify your achievement. It is just trying to think of it from a bigger picture, not just within your small role. So I think the best way is just to imagine if you literally were to disappear, what kind of material impact will happen within the company. That will give you a clearer idea of how to quantify it.
Nice. And I think the different sectorial unions should think of this also, right? How to help your people quantify, based on the benefit that they can do. Yeah, great. So yeah, I think that's pretty much point number 2 of keeping track of your performance as you go along, and eventually when you want to ask, then you start to prune down. I think that's a good thing. And bring us to point number 3 then, tips before asking for more money.
And point number 3 is to make sure that you ask at the right time. So timing plays a big part. As we mentioned,
don't ask at the toilet.
Yeah, don't ask you at the toilet. You know your boss at the urinal, you're next to the urinal, and then
it's like, hey boss, 可以不可以? Can we add?
Can I come closer to you and tell you something?
Can I talk to you about this?
So asking at the right time, I think matters a lot, and there are certain things you have to take into consideration. For very big structured companies, they actually set their annual budget 3-4 months before. Sometimes even longer. So you want to time it right. Usually, I think 3 to maybe 4-5 months prior to the budget. That will be a great time for you to sneak in your angle to let your boss know so that he can account for this kind of changes as well. Because salary increment, all these are money. And when all these costs are involved, right, all the department head has to account on. So you might as well let him know upfront. And the other thing, of course, is to make sure that you want to plan it during your assessment period. So there are certain companies that actually has very structured assessment period. Like for instance, our company I work with, their assessment period was every June and every December. So that is their typical on-cycle increment, on-cycle salary changes. Meaning to say, if you try to February backside itchy, go and ask, they will tell you, then you must tell me what you have done exceptionally well that I need to give you an off-cycle increment, which makes your case even harder because right now, 100 items not enough. You need 200 items. So
what if the case is someone else is paying me more? someone else is, I put myself out there and I randomly one day I feel like, wow, I'm very unhappy with this colleague of mine or my manager, and then I just go to LinkedIn, right? And then now it's a seller's market, right? And then I get all these offers. I go through an interview, and then that is my basis of like, oh, this company pay me 4, that company pay me 4, 5, right? Can I take that thing and come back to my boss and in an off salary cycle and say, hey, another company is paying me more. Are you going to increase my pay to keep me?
That's a good question. And usually under such instance where a counter offer will come into play, the on-off cycle thing become immaterial already. Because as long as the hiring manager is desperate to keep this headcount, they would just motion the HR to do whatever is needed. And sometimes when it comes to such increment, right, it may even come in the form of, then we package it as a promotion, no? So somewhat to work around that on-off cycle kind of thing. So all these are entirely possible. It really depends on the organization itself. There are some other organization which is a bit more unique, like there's one company that I know of. They allow you to seek a increment through a promotion or through a rank grade increment any time of the year. You basically have to raise a business case. And the business case has to include things like what you have done over and above. And you have a panel of people who will review your business case anonymously to decide whether you deserve the promotion or not, whether it's by rank grade or by title. And if you did not make the cut, then you have to wait another 6 months to accumulate more experience. So there are some companies that don't have such practices. But for companies that does have, you would want to make sure you align to those cycles so that you are able to make an easier case for yourself. Of course, you also have to look at where your company is standing right now. I think if people working in, for instance, the hotel industry right now, try to ask for, hey, I think I deserve a 30% increment. Wow, you're the first one to be fired. I need to cut costs. So I think you have to take that into consideration as well, because all this will have a part to play. And back to timing, but this also tell us something else. In September, F1 is happening again, assuming all things go back to normal, the hospitality industry may see the inflection point. That means we probably go back to where we were before and things will slowly pick up. And that could be perfect timing for you to then consider putting in that salary request. So you want to take all this into consideration. And of course, there are also certain things you want to time. Maybe you got a recent award, some success, like I mentioned in the papers. Within the HR industry, they have HR Manager of the Year award. So all these are great timing, especially when you're able to get some good PR for the company. So those are very much at the company scheduling level. But at the individual scheduling level, I think as you were jokingly mentioning earlier on, don't do it at the toilet. In the same vein, you want to pick a day where your boss is less stressed, less busy. You don't Monday morning, coffee haven't put near the mouth. Hey boss, I got things to tell you. Sheer frustrated. Who wants to have a decent conversation? So you want to think about that, and you may want to then put it more towards, assuming every week is a typical week, maybe closer towards Thursday, towards Friday, that might make more sense. And when you want to set up such conversation, right, you may also want to give them a heads up. Because if you want to ask them for some numbers to give you some indication, most department heads or reporting officer may not have the full figure. They need to check with HR. And if your company's HR is not in Singapore, or maybe the HR here need to ask the HR in UK for permission, you got to wait. So rather going in, I catch you off guard, guns blazing, bang, 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 I get my salary, you may want to give them the heads up. Hey, 2 weeks later, can we set up a session? It's about my salary. I am thinking that we can relook into it so that he or she can gather more information and to make that thing really very fruitful for you.
I want to dig a little bit deeper on the thing about inflection point that you pointed out. So the example was F1, right? So let's say F1 comes in and then you know that the whole hospitality thing is roaring back and the whole place is booked out. Although that is the F1 example, I think there are a lot of other cases where, or maybe you work in a marine company or you work in another huge company that is at an inflection point where they just sign a project, right? So, and it's already confirmed. That means they signed it already. Should I take this opportunity to ask for a raise, or should I wait to the end of the project? Because the reality is by the end of the project, the stress level is not as high, in the company, right? So it doesn't sound like the best time to be opportunistic. It's like, what at the crux? I know my whole hotel is booked out, for this season, the hotel is roaring back up. I should ask now, or should I ask after the F1 season, or after the big project? Doesn't sound like as opportunistic. You know what I mean?
I completely understand. I do think it makes sense to ask much earlier rather than later. Because when it's earlier, when everything is being planned out, and then suddenly you tell your boss, hey, I think I want to leave. I got a counter offer. Given that F1 is happening tomorrow, most likely your company will, to some extent, bend over backwards to accommodate you. Can you at least tahan, serve a longer notice?
That's what I was thinking.
F1 only 1-2 week tolong.
Yeah.
But after F1, hey boss, you see, I did a good job during F1. Right? Yeah. Why? I want salary. F1 no more, And imagine, after F1, immediately lockdown. So again, that doesn't also serve you much purpose. So I think you have to strike while the iron is hot and while your value is being seen as much more, and your contribution and your presence is much more significant at that point in time, because things hasn't happened. When things has happened, most likely you have also given the company sufficient time to hire more people, train more people, find a potential replacement or your deputy. So at that point in time, when you try to play or try to pull some stunt, right, I think your company may be much better prepared. Actually, Roger, who has been shadowing you, right, I think he can take over you. Yeah, maybe I'll just give him let him give a go.
Nice. Nothing specific to Rogers listening in. But yes, I think this is very good first part. And definitely I think by extension, we need to recognize that asking for money it's not a flat situation. Does not mean it needs to be combative. Right? There are many other ways to ask for it. You are just pursuing your own interests. Don't need to paise and don't need to assume that ask for more money means it must be combative. It is in part one, I think we explore the idea of being prepared. So before you go and ask for money, what are some of these ideas that you should do? Right? What are some tips that can support you? So with that, these are the 3 points for before asking for your money. Number one is find out your net worth, right? So compare with people in the same industry. Try not to compare with people of different industry. I mean, you can, but the reality is different industries are different and there are certain premise and even the size of the company that you work in. Try to find things that are a bit similar, but there are a lot of tools out there like Salary Board, and many other things that Adrian has shared with us that can give you more information to essentially get a gauge of what you are actually worth and is there a disparity given where you are paid today. And point number 2 is to keep track of how you did and what you did, right? So in other words, don't paise, right? Right now, all the things that you've achieved, and if you can put it into a daily practice or a weekly practice, that'll be even better. So eventually, when the time is right, you can prune down and have a very beautiful thing to share with your boss or your manager. It's like, I do this, right? So I think that's helps your case before asking for money. And point number 3 is to make sure you're asking at the right time. Don't ask at a weird time, when you're interacting with your boss. And certain sectorial situations, I think all these are very important. And if you can ask at the right time, like maybe what Roger did, right? Or like or maybe like what Adrian said about asking in a good opportunity where your company actually needs you, right? So your worth is a lot higher in that inflection point. I think that will give you a much higher opportunity rather than the comfortable time. Because I think a lot of people in Asia, you think like, oh yeah, maybe when things are more settled down, then I ask. By then, your negotiation power may not be as strong. So with that, I hope you learned something useful today. See ya.
Hey, I hope you learned something useful today and truly appreciate that you took time off to better your life with the Financial Coconut. Knowledge is that much more powerful and interesting when shared, debated and discussed. Join our community Telegram group, follow our socials, sign our newsletter. Everything is in the description below. And if there was one thing in this universe that I really hope you can do is to share this on your socials. I know I asked you to do so many things, right? So share this on your socials, partner with us, help us grow this network further. With a bigger reach, we can do more content and serve you in more ways, right? So help us, join us in this journey to grow this network and share this on your socials and continue to learn great stuff together. See you next week. Okay, so as you can tell by now, I'm a pretty responsive content creator, right? So if you talk to me about what you want to learn on the Telegram group, and if you have some feedback, I tend to take your feedback pretty seriously because we ran a poll and you coconuts want to learn this. So I'm going to go about doing some of these things where I may not know these things the best, so I will bring on someone else to come on to essentially do a 3-part monologue, which is what I always do, but in a facilitated monologue fashion, right? So yes, because there's only so much that we know individually. It's always great to bring on some friends, and I hope you like this new format. You will hear more of it, and let's keep refining as to how to make this better. So all these facilitated monologues, what I call facilitated monologues, will exist on Tuesdays together with my usual monologues, and I'll bring some friends on to share specific segments or specific ideas that I think they are better suited to work with me on this. Next week's fun, right? So I'm gonna try to interject, right? So you don't fall through this whole thing, right? Because imagine this week career, next week also career, third week also career, right? It's like people that want to focus on it, great. What about everyone else that don't? So next week I'm gonna interject. So every week I'm going to interject one thing before 3 parts will finish the series. So next week I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in Paris. So it's going to be titled Reggie in Paris. Not a reference to Emily in Paris. Duh. So my experience in France is very interesting, but at the same time I'm extremely shallow. I don't really know much about France. So let's be real. My reference to Paris is really Emily in Paris. So I'm going to share with you my experience next week, just to spice things up a little bit. I know markets are crazy, general atmosphere is a bit heavy, so next week we're gonna have some fun, talk about my experience in Paris and give you some tips and tricks if you so happen to want to come over to France for holiday. So I'll see you next week.
Imagine having one extra day every week. More time to cook healthy meals, work on that novel, or just binge some good reality TV. Now it's all possible with ClickUp, the productivity platform that'll save you one day a week on work guaranteed. It's packed with features and customization options that no other productivity tool has, so you can work the way you work best. Use code BizTech to get 15% off ClickUp's massive unlimited plan for a year, meaning you can start reclaiming your time for under $5 a month. Sign up today at ClickUp.com and use code BizTech. Hurry, this offer ends soon.